I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Rehema Kabare of the Global Buildings Performance Network, GBPN. I am the Programs Associate as a Technical Associate for the Climate Smart School program that we run, and it covers the Caribbean region. It is very lovely to be your host for today. We will begin with a short welcoming remarks and opening remarks from our two project managers, that is Marianella and then Joanna. So welcome, Marianella. Hi, Marianella, are you able to hear me? Or Joanna, you can start first and then we'll move over to Marianella.
Sure. Thanks, Rahema. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many of you. My name is Joanna Fortes. I am the global lead for the Climate Smart Schools initiative that GBPN is working together with Save the Children. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. Marianella, are you able to hear us?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for connecting here today. Good morning, colleagues, partners, and distinguished guests. Welcome to today's webinar from Reactive to Resilience, a path for safety and excellence in education infrastructure. My name is Marianela Guzman, and I am the project lead for the Caribbean Climate Smart Schools Buildings Help Desk. But before we dive into our agenda, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the tragic catastrophe of the recent earthquakes in Venezuela. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone affected. For the architects, engineers, and technical specialists gathered here today, this devastating event is a profound and powerful reminder of why our work is so vital. Safe infrastructure is not just a goal, it's a matter of human survival. Human lives are and must always be the absolute center of our concern. So this is exactly why we are here today and why the help desk exists. I don't want to take too much time of everybody's here, but it is important to acknowledge that it's been too long that the region has been trapped in this costly cycle of reactive reconstruction, awaiting for the next disaster to strike, witnesses the destruction, and then scramble to rebuild. With climate change compounding these vulnerabilities and making events more intense, this approach is simply unsustainable. We must move from reaction to resilience. That is exactly why the help desk was created and is vital. And this vital initiative is made possible thanks to the Global Partnership for the Education and our close collaboration with Save the Children, working alongside with the Ministries of Education. The help desk serves as a practical implement mechanism. Right now, we are working with 5 pioneer countries, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent the Grenadines, to provide real-time, data-driven support. Today, we are proud to share concrete tools, including our 16 newly developed technical resources. And furthermore, I am glad to announce that we now have 3 more technical notes especially tailored to St. Lucia. It will be soon added to our technical Caribbean Help Desk Hub. So thank you everyone for being here today, and I look forward to the presentations. I would like to acknowledge and thank our distinguished panelists who are here with us today. We're very fortunate to gather such a wealth of expertise, both regional and global. And we are deeply grateful for their time, their commitment, and their commitment to this vital conversation. Over to you, Rahima.
Thank you, Marianella. And for this piece of work, we work very closely with Save the Children, and I want to welcome Alejandro, who's just turning his video on off. So please come back for a very short opening remark from Save the Children, who's a partner on this project.
Thank you. So, yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this session today. My name is Alejandro del Castillo, and I work as a focal point for the infrastructure component of the SSC, not only for the Caribbean, but for many countries. I think we'll have some time in a short in a while to present a bit, to have an overview on SSC and what we do over in other countries. But again, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And yes, over to you.
Thank you, Alejandro. So now we move to the session for panel presentations, and we'll start with our first speaker, Jennifer, who's from UNDRR, and she'll talk about anchoring education in EW for all and policy mainstreaming via the CSSF. I will read her bio. She is the regional coordinator of the Early Warnings for All, that is EW for All initiatives on behalf of UNDRR, the Americas and the Caribbean. She's also the liaison officer to Canada and the US and thematic focal point for gender, persons with disabilities, indigenous knowledge, and civil society. She holds a master's degree in international development studies from St. Mary's University in Halifax, Canada, and a bachelor's degree in urban studies with a minor degree in cultural anthropology from Concordia University in Montreal, also in Canada. Her professional career includes more than 20 years of experience in Latin America and the Caribbean in areas of urban and land use planning, geographic information systems, disaster risk reduction, and project management. Welcome. Welcome, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you so much, Reina, and thanks to the organizers, of course, of this interesting webinar and fellow panelists. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. So yeah, I'm going to speak a little bit briefly on a couple of different things. I apologize in advance. I have too many slides. I don't know why I misunderstood. I was supposed to speak for 20 minutes. So having said that, if you could kindly just pass to the next slide. Okay, thanks. So just to kind of contextualize, I think Marianella spoke very eloquently on this. I think right now, especially given the situation in Venezuela, is a stark reminder of the importance of not only focusing on disaster management, which tends to happen during the emergencies, but to focus on disaster risk management, which means what we can do in order to reduce the impact of those hazards. The hazards are going to happen, but there are definitely things that we can do to alleviate or to mitigate the impacts. So just to contextualize here, just to say that the intensity and the frequency of different types of hazards is, of course, increasing. The economic losses are pretty striking. But what we are seeing is that over the past couple of decades, there has been a significant reduction in terms of loss of life, for example. So things that are being done well. We also know that 90% of these, the hazards that tend to affect our region, or I should say the disasters that are provoked from different types of hazards are water related. So you know, this is kind of, as Marianella said, a wake-up call. We need to take action. So if we go on to the next 3 slides, I think they are, just very quickly to contextualize. Sorry about that. We can start with the next one. That's not my presentation, but that's okay. So just to mention that in 2013, in the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, the World Initiative for Safe Schools was launched. This was something that partners came together and said, you know, we need to pull our resources, pull our know-how, and focus on safe schools. And within that, it included 3 main pillars, if you will. The first being the facilities themselves, which I think is a large part of the conversation today, looking at the infrastructure itself and ensuring that it's disaster resilient. The second one being the disaster management. So when events happen, that response to those situations. And then the third, of course, looking at the resilient education aspect. So how can we incorporate disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction into the school curricula? And then in 2017, the Caribbean region, with thanks to SEDIMA and other partners, took this on at the Caribbean level and initiated the Caribbean Safe Schools Initiative. And since that time, more Caribbean SIDS have been joining this, and it has continued to evolve. So if we move to the next slide, please, just very briefly to mention, this is something that brings together a wealth of partners, including a few that are online today. And it was essentially looking at strengthening a key sector in terms of preparedness response, but also in terms of risk knowledge and those other elements. Disaster risk management is not about speaking to a specific sector. It's about ensuring that we take into consideration in our national budgets, into our national planning, into everything we do, what we can do to ensure that disasters stop interrupting our development processes, and of course, reduce the damages, the losses, and particularly the losses to life and livelihoods. So moving on to the next slide. So getting into the early warnings for all initiative and linking that to the education sector. So if we move on to the next slide, please. Just to mention that this is an initiative that was launched in 2022 at the COP. So the focus at the time was very much on climate change and what we can do to ensure that we're taking preemptive action. Again, as Marianella was saying, we need to think about how we can break that vicious cycle of disaster response, recovery, and then recreating the risk. So this is about the early warning systems and how we can strengthen those. It brings to the global forum, if you will, different partners, different resources, and it makes an important link between disaster risk management and the climate change financing and resources and those types of things. So this was launched in 2022 at the COP, and since then we have been doing a lot both globally, here at the region, and in different countries. So moving to the next slide, this initiative puts forward different technical and governance elements, but I think it's important to mention here, I think, we'd be hard pressed to say that early warning systems do not make sense. I think this is a key element in bridging disaster risk management and the humanitarian agenda that we have. Early warning systems have been proven to be effective. 24 hours in advance warning can reduce the damages and the losses by 30% and significantly reduce mortality and interruptions to basic services and infrastructure damages. Since it was launched, we have seen an important uptake in the number of countries that are reporting through the Sendai Framework Monitor on the existence of multi-hazard early warning systems. So the messages are getting across, and more countries are getting actively engaged. If we move on to the next slide, please. I was referring to the pillars. So essentially, this initiative does not look to reinvent the wheel. When countries globally adopted the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, they created a working group looking at terminology and indicators for the Sendai Framework. So this essentially takes up what countries had agreed in terms of multi-hazard early warning systems. So there are 4 technical pillars that are being led by different UN agencies in conjunction with other UN sister partners and private sector, civil society, and a wealth of partners. But it looks at disaster risk knowledge and disaster risk management, the part on observations and forecasting, the dissemination and the communication of the warnings themselves, and then, of course, the capacities for preparedness and response. And then within all of that, of course, is the key factor of governance. If we don't have inclusive, meaningful, multi-sectoral and interdisciplinary governance, then technically we can have the best tools, but they will likely not be that effective. So moving on, I'm going to ask whoever is supporting me with the slides, in the interest of time, if we can just, next one, please. Just move on very quickly. We'll go to, I would say, okay, actually, if you can go back one, that would be appreciated, just to mention, because I know that there are a lot of conversations about early action, anticipatory action, and I think it's important to kind of flag what those terms are referring to in terms of multi-hazard early warning systems. So multi-hazard early warning systems really are about ensuring that it's looking at cascading simultaneous hazards. It's not just one event that happens, but one event that snowballs and can lead into another. So we need to have the planning focusing on those different types of scenarios. Early action is what countries, what communities, what the education sector and other sectors can do in times to plan for those types of different scenarios. And then anticipatory action is similar, but it has a strong focus on triggering financing so that communities can take action. So I think that that's important, because I know anticipatory action frameworks and plans are in existence in some of the countries that are being looked at. So if we move on to the next one, please, the next slide, just to kind of mention that there are specific concrete tools that have been developed to support multi-hazard early warning systems, looking at specific population groups and different sectors. And getting into the education sector, if we go to the next slide, just to mention some recommendations that I think in terms of integrating multi-hazard early warning systems into the education sector, but also the education sector into what countries are doing in terms of multi-hazard early warning systems. So within the Caribbean, I think it's important to mention that a lot of the tools that are being used at the global level nowadays actually came about from the Caribbean. SEDIMA had developed the gap analysis that is now being looked at globally as a tool to identify the key gaps in those different 4 technical +1 governance pillars of multi-hazard early warning systems. And then, of course, SEDIMA also has their model multi-hazard early warning systems. The first regional launch of this initiative was also carried out here in the Caribbean. And in terms of recommendations, I just wanted to flag here a few things. That the education sector is key. It needs to be engaged in the multi-hazard early warning systems governance, and designating focal points at the country level is a good way of ensuring that that communication can take place. To look at the inventory of the education and the schools in place. So looking at the hazards, the vulnerabilities, the infrastructure that's needed, and of course, having those up-to-date directories. The buildings, of course, the site selection, all of that is absolutely key, ensuring that this is budgeted for in the regular national budget, and having the protocols in place, and of course, children that can be disseminators and conveyors of these messages to their families and communities. And lastly, to close, I just wanted to mention that on the 7th and the 8th of July, there will be a national consultative workshop taking place on multi-hazard early warning systems, early warnings for all, in Grenada. And that will be at the National Stadium. So for those that are joining today in Grenada that would like to join that workshop, we'd be happy to share more information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for the invite. I welcome you to drop that particular detail on the chat for someone who might have missed it. So we'll move over to our second speaker for today, who is Mr. Lyston Scarrett. He's from UNICEF and he'll be presenting on protecting the right to education. I will read his bio. So Mr. Lyston is an international development professional with a successful history of leading strategic initiatives in education reform, youth empowerment, and community development across the Eastern Caribbean. He currently is with the UNICEF office for the Eastern Caribbean area and he partners with regional ministries of education to implement the Caribbean Roadmap for safe learning environments and spearheading youth climate resilience program. So previously, he served as a director of community, youth, and sports services for the government of Montserrat, and he specializes in aligning data and research with results-based interventions to drive policy development and social transformations across different or rather diverse jurisdictions. So welcome, Mr. Lester.
Greetings, colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, wherever they may be. No slides today, just going to go through a few key points, and I hope it will reinforce some things that we already know and probably validate some other things. So I think I'm perfectly aligned with what Jennifer was closing in saying, and that is that as we look into this social infrastructure, education and children and young people have to be a core component or consultative element as we move forward. So at UNICEF, we begin with a very simple but fundamental principle, and that education is a right. And so going through all of our hazards and or disasters, we need to ensure that young people and youth are a part of the process, not just end beneficiaries, but we actually consult with them throughout. This right does not disappear when a hurricane or a tsunami strikes, when schools are damaged, or when the community faces climate-related emergencies. The challenge before us is therefore not only to see how we rebuild the schools after a disaster, but how we ensure that learning never stops. And I think this is a very unique challenge. If we think back, as small island developing states, schools serve multiple functions. They are the centers of learning, community hubs, emergency shelters, social protection platforms, and often one of the most important public facilities within a community. When a school fails during a disaster, the consequences expand far beyond the education sector, and hence the resilience of the infrastructure is inseparable from the resilience of the society itself. So this is why UNICEF advocates for a shift in perspective from viewing schools as isolated buildings to recognizing them as essential social infrastructure. Investments in resilience of school infrastructure are investments in children's rights, family, community protection, and national resilience. And so one of the things we need to note is that we learned many important lessons from COVID-19, and that educational continuity depends much more on just a physical classroom. When schools were forced to close, countries had to invest in digital learning infrastructure. We were able to better maintain communication, student engagement. The pandemic demonstrated our resilience, but post-pandemic, we've retrogressed in many ways from the maintenance of key infrastructure that allowed education to be sustainable, and even ties with some of the measures that Jennifer would have referred to in the early warning systems. This means that we need sustained investment, not only in school buildings, but also in the computers, the devices, the internet connectivity, the learning management systems, the digital assessment tools, educational television, and even radio platforms and ebooks that were used during this period. Equally important is ensuring that teachers are trained and effectively use technology with parents who we know sometimes have a bit of a learning gap themselves, right? So as we prepare for future hurricanes, pandemics, volcanic events, and emergencies, that digital learning infrastructure must be an important part of what we look at. Now, the Caribbean has already demonstrated great leadership when it comes to initiatives such as the Caribbean Safe School Initiative mentioned before, and developing regional frameworks to integrate disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, or even educational planning. However, it is the maintenance and the reduction of reactive approaches that is key at this time. Instead, we must institutionalize resilience throughout our systems to ensure not only the infrastructure lifestyle, but the planning and design, maintenance, operations, and eventual retrofitting is built into our ecosystems, right? So I want to leave with you a few considerations. First, that Resilience must be child-centered. Infrastructure decisions should be informed by the needs and experiences of children, particularly the most vulnerable to disruption. And that includes our children with disabilities, our children living in remote or rural communities, and those facing educational disadvantages. We need to look at resilience to be inclusive, universal accessibility, gender responsive designs, and safe access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, an absolute must. And third, resilience must be financially sustainable. And I think for those who work in ministries of education or construction and works or public works departments, this tends to be one of the more challenging ones. Every dollar invested in risk-informed infrastructure helps to reduce future losses, lower recovery costs, learning loss intervention, protects public investment, and strengthens continuity. One of the best tools you can actually use in this process is something called the cost of inaction. Most times we know we have to make very strong cases to our finance colleagues, and your request is measured or compared against requests from health, from society, from rural affairs. And I think being able to present a cost of inaction in education drives forward one of the strongest points of long-term financial deficit if immediate actions are not going to be taken, right? The Caribbean children deserve schools that are safe, inclusive, climate resilient, and capable of supporting their learning journey. So at UNICEF, we remain committed to supporting governments and partners in this effort. So as I close, let me give a few strategic recommendations. One, institutionalize your risk-informed planning. We try our best to abolish the reactive and the post-disaster planning. And as you heard from Jennifer, the early warning systems are no longer a recommendation, but an absolute must. We want to embed disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation data directly into our early stage infrastructure life cycles. Map localized hazards such as storm surges, flooding history, landslides, in addition to the hurricanes and tsunami and earthquake considerations, right? Second, deploy inclusive climate smart designs. I think it's time that we standardize designs that serve dual functions. Buildings must feature structural retrofitting, yes, for Category 5 hurricanes, but also integrated water, sanitation, and hygiene, and universal accessibility for our children with disabilities. Third, build hybrid, agile digital infrastructure. We know this is our fallback when something happens, but we must treat digital learning networks as essential social infrastructure, not an optional enhancement. Invest in resilient cloud-based learning management systems, and in partnership with organizations like the OECS or like CARICOM, we have localized ebooks, libraries, and offline digital content. And finally, ensure that our continuity plans and protocols are up to date. And I'm sure colleagues will speak to this in a bit, but while we develop these in a projectized basis, it must become a very lifeblood, consistent experience for all of our countries, right? Every dollar invested in this proactive, risk-informed infrastructure lifestyle is directly going to reduce future losses, slash national recovery costs, and safeguard our children's fundamental right to learn. And so I thank you for your consideration and your time, and I'll look for any questions that may come up in the chat.
Thank you, Laston. I do love that you talked about that education, or rather resilience, should be child-centered, and also it needs to be financially sustainable. That's the only way we get things done properly. I will invite the next speaker, who is Gail Drapes, sorry, and she will talk to us a little bit about operationalizing the blueprint. I will read her bio. Ms. Gill is a disaster risk management professional with more than 15 years of experience at a regional, national level. She is education and training specialist at the CDEMA, which is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. at the coordination unit, and she leads the agency's learning and development portfolio, including the Regional Training Center. She has previously served as program officer at the Barbados Department of Emergency Management. She holds an MSc in Natural Resources and Environmental Management from the University of West Indies and a master's certificate in Results-Based Monitoring and Evaluation and Information Systems from the Université Laval. And she has a certificate in Adult Learning from the University of Calgary. Welcome, Ms. Gill.
Thank you, Regina. Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping that you can hear me well. First of all, I'd like to thank the host for inviting Sedima to participate in this webinar. We always appreciate an opportunity to work with our partners to promote school safety. And my presentation this morning is looking a bit at how do we institutionalize this idea of school safety. Regionally and nationally, but I think largely my discussion will come from the perspective of how that institutionalization can possibly be advanced at the national level. So can you have the next slide, please? Right, so this is generally what I'll cover. I will give you a little background on SEDIMA and CDM, a particular point that I think is relevant to the philosophical concept underpinning this webinar, which is moving from the reactive to the proactive. I'll mention very briefly as examples some regional school safety initiatives we've done, but I hope to spend most of my time looking at how do we do that institutionalization of school safety, move from the perspective of moving from just tools that we're implementing towards establishing systems for school safety. And then I'll hopefully end with a couple of recommendations. Next slide. So for those of you who are not familiar with SEDIMA, many of you probably would be. Yes, that's the right thing. SEDIMA is a CARICOM institution that's responsible for disaster risk management. And we comprise 20 participating states that have signed the agreement that establishes SEDIMA within the CARICOM system. Our governance system mechanism is the highest decision-making body is the Council of Ministers responsible for disaster management in the 20 participating states. And then there's a technical advisory committee, which is the national disaster coordinators or the directors of disaster management in the same participating states. And okay, sorry. And but I work for the coordinating unit, which is the sort of the secretariat. And what we do is what we've done for most of our existence since we started as SEDARA in 1991 is that we promoted a concept or an approach to disaster management called comprehensive disaster management. And what we recognized way back in the mid-90s is that you cannot constantly be reactive. We will always have to respond to events of some nature because of just the nature of the hazard landscape in the Caribbean, both the natural and the natural hazards that we face, like hurricanes and earthquakes, but also the technological and the human-made hazards that can sometimes cause more trouble than even the natural hazards. And what we recognized was that what we needed to do was to move away from just strong preparedness and response systems to also having those mechanisms in place to reduce risk. And I think Jennifer alluded to this earlier, but also that what we needed to do or to ensure was that all levels of society were engaged in disaster risk management. And this is relevant to this webinar, to the idea of institutionalization, because a key aspect of that institutionalization is that cross-sectoral accountability. Next slide, please. I won't spend long on this. I believe Jennifer mentioned earlier the Caribbean Safe Schools Initiative, which we began in 2017, as we're currently it is basically a political level agreement to promote and to advance school safety at the national level. It currently has 19 countries and territories in the region that have signed on to the most recent declaration, which is the St. Martin Declaration. And it's built around it is aligned to the Global Comprehensive School Safety Framework, and we've developed a regional roadmap for school safety that the countries have adopted, also aligned to the CSS. But also for the SEDIMA system, we would have developed alongside the work that we did with our colleagues, UNDRR, OECS, and so on, to establish the CSSA. We also established the Model Safe Schools program. And that's a set of comprehensive standards for school safety. It allows you to assess the schools against a set of standards that include safety standards, greening standards, and I think relevant for this webinar, building standards as well. Identify where the gaps are. Develop action plans that are costed so you know what the cost is, and then work with your partners to both to finance and implement those action plans, and then to continue through a cycle of consistent assessment, planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. And the idea behind the Model Safe Schools program is to provide a tool or a mechanism for countries to institutionalize school safety. Next slide, please. So the idea of school safety, I don't think that anybody would say that it does not have the broad support across the region, at the national level, at the local and community level within the Caribbean. We believe in that our schools should be safe and resilient. But we are stuck in, I think, a cycle of reaction where we're constantly having to focus on responding to crises. And I think one of Jennifer's slides did highlighted that, I think probably her first slide, where we are in this sort of cycle of experiencing damage, then having to incur debt to repair that damage, which of course causes increases the vulnerability of the country. And then the event reoccurs and we find ourselves in another humanitarian need. And this is particularly important for us in the Caribbean, where a lot of our school infrastructure is also integrated into the emergency management mechanisms as shelters. And it has a lot of implications for matters particularly to the continuity of learning. And even though we do have mechanisms, stakeholder-driven mechanisms, we still find a lot of our approaches are still very fragmented and siloed. So while we have blueprints, where we have a blueprint, there's the CSSI, the MSSP, a lot of other regional initiatives. If I give me a pen and a piece of paper and I sit and think long enough, I can start listing all of the initiatives that between SEDIMA and our various partners we have implemented over the last couple of decades. I've been involved in disaster management. We still find that we come back to this question of how do we move from the reactive to the proactive? So the question becomes, how do we institutionalize a more proactive approach to building safe, resilient schools? The next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to suggest some points for consideration. Wouldn't be claiming to give you a perfect roadmap, but I think there are certain things that we have to consider when we talk about institutionalization. And it means that we have to be thinking about institutionalization as how we embed school safety into the systems that we have, the systems that define standards and the quality assurance, how we assign responsibilities within the education sector, and then across different sectors that have a role to play. How do we develop data systems that can support that evidence-based decision-making for resilience? How do we then have that information and these considerations feeding into the systems that determine public investment financing, that look at the implementation of these public investment projects and other programs. And then not to move away from it, because in the Caribbean, we cannot relinquish our efforts in preparedness and response. But then how do we also integrate all of this into both the points at which we have an opportunity to mitigate or reduce risk, particularly, for example, when we may be constructing new school infrastructure. But then how do we also, if we have been impacted and the impacts are going to be inevitable certainly in this part of the world, when we're looking at our recovery, how do we make that recovery more resilient? And do we have the right stakeholders and the right data and information? And have we established the standards and sort of made that all into one cohesive system to inform a recovery that's more resilient? Next slide, please. So there are a couple of points I wanted to highlight in addition to those, but I wanted to highlight the cross-sectoral accountability. Now, the purpose of this slide was really more to give an example of what we mean when we say cross-sectoral accountability. If you worked for any length of time, or you've worked in this field for a little bit for any length of time, you find that often we are preaching to the choir. We're often in spaces where people understand what we mean by you have a role in disaster management. But often outside of our sector, where there are a number of other critical sectors, they don't understand. So this slide is an example, just looking at some of the different stages in the life cycle of planning, budgeting, procurement, and so on. The different areas that you need, for example, for planning, if you're planning to build a new school, you need all kinds of data, hazard, climate data, increasingly because of climate change. Some of that data may sit with the Ministry of Education, but some of it also sits with the Met Services. Some of it is sitting with national statistics. Some of the critical information you need and the decisions to be made are really with planning and economic development. So what we have to do is get to that point where all of the agencies understand the point in this life cycle where their data and information, but also their authority, their financing, the technical input is required, and that they understand what role they actually have to play in school safety, and that it's not just a Ministry of Education or role, or if it involves, shelters or emergency management, then it becomes a disaster office. We really need to, and this is still a challenge for us in the region, I think is one of the biggest challenges, really get all of our various stakeholders who should be at the table to not just come to the table, but to understand, and for that understanding to help to drive proactive action on their part as well. Next slide. Okay. And this point is my second to last slide, so I'm almost right. But I think increasingly we understand that this proactive approach we're looking to undertake has to be backed by data. I think we're fast running out of time within the region to be consistently giving the same reasons and excuses as to why we can't get this done. We do have data. It's in different places. Some of it's in the Ministry of Education, some of it is in the Met Services, and some of it may be in other institutions and sectors and agencies. But I think the critical thing that we really have to consider is that we need this data.
Partners will address the gaps that may exist in.
Hello? Pardon me? Sorry, sorry. Yes, so what we needed to do is that we need this data in order to drive those proactive approaches. When we're setting the standards for building climate smart codes, quality assurance mechanisms, all of these things. We also needed to strengthen our operational systems to be able to establish those education information management systems that we've been talking about for a few years. And we needed to support the learning part of the cycle. After an event, after an activity, after anything, do we have the data and the information that we can look at, analyze, see what went wrong, what we can do better, and be able to integrate that learning into the processes going forward. And for that, we need to be able to establish the data management systems. Now, last slide, please. The next slide. And this is the last slide. So, oh, that doesn't look very good on the screen, but the key points are there. So in terms of in practice, what we do need to do, I think, is we need to have agreed minimum standards. And there needs to be some agreement on what those standards are so that everybody is sort of singing from the or playing from the same hymn sheet. We need to embed those standards. We always say embed them into systems, but I think one of the critical places we really have to start targeting is how are we embedding those into public investment systems. Not just looking at these. I think a lot of our financing, because perhaps it comes through projects and sort of different programs around the region and nationally and so on. We sometimes don't always see these things. I see it as a cohesive idea of an investment into a system, regardless of where the funding is coming from. So you need a system that allows you to, for that investment to be prioritized and to be targeting the critical gaps. The matter of data and information is not just a Ministry of Education data. I think the ministries of education can do what they can to strengthen their data management. But I think we also need to see it as part of a larger national sort of data set that is looking and used to address risk. That cross-sectoral accountability again, understanding what the different roles are and that are assigned to the different agencies, and also what are their reporting obligations. How are they feeding into that learning process for strengthening the mechanisms as we go forward? And we really do need to move from the one-off assessments, and this plagues us a bit because assessments have a cost, and a lot of times that financing again has to come through some very like different projects and programs from different donors and supporters and so on. But we need to get into that cycle. So again, the institutionalization of it, we need to move that cycle of those assessments away from just being funded under projects to integrating them into the work programs of our ministries, and not just the Ministry of Education, all the other players that are involved, and getting into a cycle and a rhythm of consistent assessment, using the information to identify the gaps, and then also working to address the gaps, and not just having a nice assessment report sitting there, but working to address those gaps, and then also being able to look at the work that we have done, identify what went wrong, what went right, and then how can we feed what we've learned into that assessment cycle. And I'd like to conclude there, and thank you very much. Hope I wasn't too long, but thank you.
Thank you, Gail. And thank you for reminding us that it's very important to move beyond blueprints into actual practice. And one way is having a cyclic practice within the work that we're doing. Now, over to the fourth presenter. We'll move to something more technical. This is by Andres Cruz from CDRI, and he'll talk about engineering retrospectives and looking at aspects to do with passive cooling, nature-based solutions, as well as structural redundancies, particularly for small island infrastructures. So Mr. Andres is a Colombian architect specializing in natural resource management, environment, and disaster response with a master's degree in environmental management and assessment. He has more than 22 years of professional experience in risk reduction and disaster response projects within large international cooperation programs for different donors in South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and Africa. He has extensive experience working in disaster response, risk management, and resilience projects with environmental approaches with agencies such as Habitat for Humanity, International, PAHO, USAID, International Organization of Migration, among others. He is recognized for managing the implementation of regional, multi-sectoral strategies and programs focused on resilience and adaptation to climate change in critical infrastructure in the LATMAC region for CDRI. So over to you, Mr. Andres.
Thank you so much, Regina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm going to be a little brief in the taking into consideration the time. So please, next. So the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. We are a coalition, a partnership of national governments, United Nations agencies, programs, multilateral development banks, private sector, and knowledge institutions. You can go to the next in the meantime that I'm talking. Thank you. That promote resiliency of new and existing infrastructure systems to climate and disaster risk in support of sustainable development. From CDRI, we promote the rapid development of resilient infrastructure to respond to the sustainable development goals. We have some strategic priorities, that is the technical support and capacity building of the members of the coalition, the research and knowledge management, and the advocacy and partnership in the regions. Right now, for the coalition, we are 57 countries and 12 international organizations, including CDIMA right now. Next, please. We have different approaches and different projects. For the program, the Small Island Development States, we cover the sectors of the housing, coastal, telecommunications, power, water, education, different sectors in different small island development states, because we understand the needs of the region, the conditions of the countries, and we try to increase that resiliency and reducing the risk in a multi-sectorial way. Next, please. So for the resilience is really important in all the sectors of the infrastructure. And as Liston from UNICEF was mentioned, educational facilities in small island development states are, for the community, one of the most important infrastructure that has to be functional after the disaster. So this graphic shows what we are doing and what we should do, because actually everything happens in the Caribbean once a year. We have the hurricane season that affects us 5 months every single year. So that didn't give us time enough to recover and rebuild in a build back better way. So we're always trying to recover disaster after disaster. So the idea is to invest proactively in the resilient infrastructure and not reactively, as we are doing right now. Because every time that we create in a system energy independency, water security, stronger designs, working with the construction codes, we implement nature-based solutions and build community resiliency, we're going to reduce the loss and damage after a disaster. So it's better to have a proactive rather than a reactive approach that will reduce the damage. And next, please. And as my colleague from CDIMA, Gail, mentioned really clear, we need to stop only reacting like this, because we need to think and consider that all the systems are linked between them. And if one system fails, everything could be affected, and we will create a double impact in our communities, in our population. One thing, and let's say one example, for example, in Dominica 2017 or in Bahamas in 2019, that it doesn't matter if the building, let's talk about the school right now. One school has all the structural architectonical part really well built, and we don't have power. We know that that school is going to be used as a shelter. But if that shelter cannot provide power for the community that is going to be hosted there, the shelter is not functional. And if the power is not working, maybe the water pumping system is not working either, because they need the power. And if we don't consider that, that will be catastrophic for the shelter. And in the second way, if we only have one redundant system that is maybe a fuel generator to provide power to the facility, but the airport collapse and the port collapse, and there is no way to bring fuel to that generator, the plan A is not working either. So we need a plan B. So we need to start thinking in all the cascade effects and how one single system can collapse the other systems. And if these all other systems collapse, the protection problem in the country after a disaster will be catastrophic, and will create a lot of damage. And to recover that will take too much time and too much money to the country. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't have the time because, for example, Bahamas, Dorian was at the end of October 2019, but the hurricane season starts 6 months after that again. And if we don't recover the system to cover the basic needs of the community, that could be a problem. Next, please. So in this idea, there is no resiliency if we don't have sustainability. So we cannot start thinking in the action that we need to do right now without considering the effect to the climate change and the impact that it's going to have in the future. So for that reason, it's really important to use the nature-based solutions because it will protect the communities after a disaster. It will secure the water, secure the climate resiliency, support the economic resiliency, and strengthen communities, build it together, that community. So the use of mangrove, the wetlands, the forests, the green infrastructure, and coral reef will protect us in the Caribbean for the hurricane season. And it's not that expensive as the gray solutions and white solution that we have right now, but it will generate a lot of multiple benefits. It will support the people and nature, cost effective and sustainable, and of course, it will reduce the impact of future events in the region. Next, please. One of these examples that we can use in the Caribbean is the passive cooling. You know that when a hurricane happens, let's say the Caribbean, the heat, and for example, this year that we have a hot wave, really bad in the Caribbean, the use of AC, the use of different systems that consume power, they're okay, but they consume a lot of energy. But if something happened and the building is not designed to prevent the lack of power after a disaster, it's not going to be a space that is going to be comfortable for the communities to stay there. So if we can think in advance from the design to have natural ventilations, thermal mass, cross ventilations, hot air escapes, solar protection, green surroundings, that the building can be without power, fresh and comfortable for the community that is going to be there, is a good way to mitigate the risk after a disaster, to reduce the footprint of the climate change, and of course, it's going to be something that is adapted for the future. Next, please. So from CDI, we are trying to consider all these different approach for a multisectorial way to reduce the risk of disaster, to adapt to the climate change, and having in consideration that without sustainability, there is no resiliency. So we need to put in our brain that there is not a way to rebuild without consider disaster risk reduction and sustainability actions for the future. So we need to consider that every time that we are going to build back better, we need to think that we are not covering the gap that we are living today. We need to think in the gap that we want to cover in the future, reducing the climate change effect and adapting the communities in a disaster risk reduction way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Andres. That was a very good presentation on technical solutions that we can have. The next two speakers will be Dr. Idalia Ferdinand from the Ministry of Education in SBG and Patience Mutisia of GBPN. So they'll be talking about the help desk in action and translating good practice notes into localized infrastructure resilience. I'll read their bios. I'll start with Dr. Idalia. She is a disaster management and sustainable development specialist with more than 20 years of experience. She serves as Senior Education Officer in the Ministry of Education in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, leading the School Safety and Research Unit. She has several disaster management and climate-related publications, as well as conference presentations and teaching experience. Her emergency management experience includes serving as Deputy Director of NEMO, coordinating shelter operations after the last Sophia eruption and Hurricane Burial, and also leading recovery work in Southern Grenadines. She is a certified emergency management instructor cadet force leader at the rank of major and a volunteer in various other community involvement. Ms. Patience Mutisia is a graduate architect and project coordination professional, supporting sustainable building and urban development initiatives across Africa, the Caribbean, and Pacific regions. As Africa, her work at GBPN, she provides technical and coordination support for programs, including this particular piece of work for our Climate Smart School Resilience program. And she holds a bachelor's degree in architecture from the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Kenya and is BFGE certified. She's passionate about sustainable design and resilient cities. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Idelia and Patience.
Thank you very much, and pleasant good morning to all. I know that time is constrained, so I'll jump right into the presentation. And just to remind those who may not be familiar with St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we are a multi-island state consisting of over 30 islands, islets, and keys, stretching from the largest mainland, St. Vincent, to Union Island in the south. Only about 8 of these islands include, in addition to the mainland, is habitable, and all of the islands are at risk to hazards. Our historical experiences, as you will see on the next slide, is that our population of just over 100,000 per people have been impacted by quite a number of disasters. To name a few, as you can see on the slide: hurricanes, volcanic eruption, COVID, and so many others. Our most recent experiences have been the volcanic eruption in 2021, while we were dealing with COVID-19, and during that period, we also experienced hurricane. So we were dealing with compounding hazards at that particular time, in addition to dengue outbreak during that 2021 period. More recently, in 2024, we were severely impacted by Hurricane Beryl, and many of our educational institutions, as you will see on the next slide, were directly affected. So approximately 38 of our schools were moderately or severely impacted, and that includes our early childhood centers, our primary schools, secondary schools, and most of the ones that were not impacted were used as shelters. This exposed quite a number of our students, educators, our investment in education was at high risk. And it seems as if we are constantly responding to hazards. And so we have been working on, over the years, taking a more proactive approach to dealing with hazards and not waiting until something happens to address the shortcomings we have at our schools in particular, because they not only serve as educational facilities, but they also serve the wider community as places where they meet and engage in different activities. And many of them become emergency shelters whenever we are impacted by hazards. So, as you will see on the next slide, if we can go to the next slide, the one following that. Right, so this slide shows Union Island, where the top photo is the only secondary school on that island, and Union Island is the island that was most severely impacted by Hurricane Beryl. And the photo below shows the primary school alongside the community library. Those who are severely impacted, and that has been the trend for many of our educational institutions. In the case of Beryl, most of the students had to be relocated to the mainland for schooling. And so we have been working closely with our partners locally, regionally, to ensure that we are doing what we need to maintain our schools in particular and ensure that they are at a high standard. And so the Climate Smart program has been very supportive and has been, we have been able to put the information from that particular program into practical use in collaboration with our local partners, mainly BRAXA, which is responsible for school maintenance and all our not just schools, but all our government buildings, they are responsible for their maintenance. Next slide. So looking at the help desk that was established as part of the Climate Smart Education System Initiative to support government and educational providers in Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which are the participating countries in this particular program. The next slide will highlight the different tools that are available through the help desk, including technical guide, actionable tools and template, good practice notes, and in-country technical support based on requests from the Ministry of Education. And continuing with the next slide, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our what we call BRAXA Building, Road and General Services Division have been very, very practical and ensuring that the help desk was put to very constructive use. So they have assisted in the development of 16 deliverables that are already being used in SVG to help in terms of assessment and preventative maintenance of school beforehand, and also for cost-effective and timely interventions. Next slide. The help desk provide checklists, they provide guides, and are utilized to build the resilience of our schools. And as we can see on this slide, there are site selection checklists and resilient procurement guides, and there's an opportunity to provide budget and financing for alongside these tools. So what the help desk does is that it ensures that the local entities, not just BRAXA, but all the different ministries that are working in ensuring that our schools are constructed, located, used, and maintained, that we are all on the same page because we have access to all of the same tools, and to ensure that safety considerations are taken into concern, and to ensure that we are complying with the safety standards, including building codes, the preventative maintenance, so that we are protecting our educational investment, our educators, and our learners. So We are really grateful for the support with this initiative. And we here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are working with the various stakeholders, and BRACSA has been very, very instrumental in ensuring that even this year that the necessary maintenance, assessment, and schedules are already in place so that our school repairs and construction can be done in a good time for the beginning of the next school year. So this has been a great initiative, and we in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are putting it into action. We believe in being proactive. We have been utilizing the Caribbean Safe School Initiative and the MSSP tools to ensure that our schools are safe spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ibelia. Now I will take you through further details about the help desk of the Caribbean Climate Smart School buildings. So this platform is a central point between the Ministries of Education and partners seeking technical support. It's important to just again echo what Dr. Ibelia was saying, that this was established by ensuring that, or rather it was established as a climate smart education initiative system to support the government and the education ministries. And it is accessible to the education ministries in the 5 countries that have been mentioned. That's Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and Grenadines also. So this help desk provides access to technical notes, tools, guidance documents, case studies, and request submission services that are tied to the challenge that a school is facing. And it supports the climate resilience, disaster risk reduction, inclusion, and sustainable school infrastructure. So when you're accessing the site, to request on your inquiry and submit the request of the challenge you're facing. So the platform works as shown. Step 1 is to identify a challenge. If it's either under school maintenance, climate resilience, school retrofitting, or emergency shelter functionality. Then step 2 is submitting the request. So you will see a form that looks like this, and you're required to provide your name, your role, organization, country, email address, which is very key because this is what we'll use to respond to your request, your phone number as well, including the country code, and selecting the kind of assistance you need. Then there's a box right here where you actually provide the questions that you need answers to. Step 3 is the technical support. So we review, as GMPN, we review the question or the request that has been raised. And this is allocated to specific partner experts who are well fit to address the challenge and give actionable solutions. Then finally, step 4 is the tailored output. So the solution will be given through either the technical notes, assessment tools, or maintenance frameworks, also either policy guidance. So this is just a sort of illustration of how the help desk works. So as I've shared earlier, you submit a request to the help desk on our site. Then the second step is our technical team, that is us, GVPN, review the request and also prepare a tailored response. This is also where we welcome the Ministry of Education to assess the request that has been submitted and also review the solution that we provide. And then after this reviewing of both the technical team and the Ministry of Education, you receive a response from our email address, the Caribbean Help Desk, where we give out the recommendation to the solutions that we want to address the challenge that you have raised.
And finally, the document is assessed if it's a guidance note, if it's a tool, if it's a policy guidance to solve the challenge. So I will welcome you to scan the QR code that is right in your screens, just to see what we are talking about in terms of the guidance notes, the practical tools that we have worked on. So I will give you just a few seconds to quickly scan as I proceed. So these 16 practical technical resources have are actionable and scalable. This was built comprehensively to ensure that the toolkit covers entirely an entire infrastructure life cycle for the countries. This means delivering a suite of ready-to-use tools ranging from the climate risk screening and site checklists to resilient procurement language and preventive maintenance protocols. So we have seen that this is very ideal to the Caribbean area and the 5 countries that have been listed. So we'll just break it down into 4 parts of the 16 documents. So in the first part, it's planning and policy. So we have the Climate Smart School Infrastructure Framework. This provides an overall framework of integrating the resilience, sustainability and inclusion in the school infrastructure. There's a policy and standards review guidance. This helps the government assess and strengthen the policies to address the climate risks. There is a climate risk screening guidance. It again provides a structured approach to identify some of these climate and disaster risks that affect the schools. And then there's the site selection checklist. This provides a proper selection of safer schools by assessing hazards, exposure that make the school vulnerable. Then there's the assessment and design group, where we have the climate smart school models. This presents adaptable design models for new and existing buildings for retrofitting that respond to the local climate risks. And then there is a school infrastructure rapid assessment tool, which enables quick evaluation of the condition and risk of the school buildings and the priority actions and investments. Then there's also the photo-based assessment tool. This is a tool where you basically take photographs and have a simple guidance on how to standardize the inspections and capture any evidence that occur consistently. Then there's the design documentation review tool. This helps in reviewing the existing documents, architectural, engineering drawings, to ensure that there has been resilient safety and safety measures that have been implemented. Then for the semi-last group, there's the operations and maintenance group, which has the school maintenance framework document. It introduces a system for managing schools, and this is through the planning, tracking, and continuous improvement, because that's under maintenance. Then there's a localized maintenance checklist. This provides a climate and context-specific checklist for routine inspections of the school systems and components. And there's a preventive maintenance protocols. It's a guide for schools that prevent maintenance, that give preventive maintenance activities, frequency and responsibilities to reduce on the risks and the costs. There's the schools as shelters guidance, support school to safety function as emergency shelters while maintaining their primary role in education. And then there's also now the final group, implementation and capacity. So this 13th document, it's the resilient procurement guidance. It helps integrate climate resilience, quality, and sustainability into procurement processes and contracts. Sample terms of reference provides ready-to-use TORs for consultants. Case studies and good practice highlights real-world examples. This is very crucial because we need to have realistic, actionable policies and guidance tools and notes. And then the help desk resource library, a central hub that provides ongoing access to all tools, templates, guidance, and emerging resources. So I will just quickly take you through some examples of how you can use the technical guidance notes. So the first one is a school infrastructure resilience and climate integration scorecard. So this is how it looks on the first page. And let's say a challenge has come in where how do we determine which schools should be prioritized for climate resilience investments? So the solution given is the school infrastructure resilience and climate integration scorecard provides a standardized assessment framework that evaluates the schools, the key resilience indicators, that's the climate hazards, the structural integrity, wash accessibility, energy efficiency, and emergency preparedness. Because of time, I'll just quickly skim through this. Another guidance note, there's a rapid photo-based assessment protocol. So a challenge may be raised. A school reports storm damage, but technical teams cannot immediately visit the site. So this is accessible to people in the school where they do not have the technical information or knowledge, but they can actually use the tool. And this tool is simply used by capturing photographs of the school infrastructure. So it guides you on how to take the photos and where exactly to take the photos. It includes the required angles, priority building components to inspect, and the structured reporting template, how to fill in the observations that you're making in the school, and enabling this will enable the technical experts to conduct a rapid remote assessment from where they are and give out actionable solutions to the challenge. And then finally, another example, the school safety and resilience training. So a challenge may arise. The school staff lack the knowledge and tools to maintain safe and resilient school infrastructure. So the solution to this is this guidance note or this tool provides practical training materials, inspection checklists, maintenance procedures, and guidance on climate risks, emergency preparedness, and preventive maintenance. It also equips the ministry officials, engineers, school staff, which will give them the skills needed to identify these risks and how to conduct the routine inspections and implement resilience measures. So we will just take you through a very short, quick video on how this help desk looks like. Rehema, please alert me if it's audible.
Introducing the Caribbean Climate Smart School Buildings Help Desk. The Caribbean Help Desk offers technical support to ministries of education. When a request comes into the help desk, our team connects your question with the right experts who provide tailored, practical responses based on local context and best practices. The help desk prepares the resource material and shares it with the Ministry of Education for feedback. The request is then closed.
Thank you very much. And I hope this was instrumental to everyone here. Thank you. Back to you, Rehema.
Thank you, Patience, and thanks, Dr. Adelia. Before we close out, I know we have only 4 minutes left, and If you had any questions to any panelists, please drop them in the chat box. We'll address them at a later stage because time is up for today. I want to welcome back Alejandro from Save the Children, who is an architect and urban planner, to tell us a little bit about the work, specifically the larger piece of work beyond Caribbean, and how that ties into what we have been talking today. So, Alejandro, you only have 2 minutes.
Thank you.
So sorry.
No worries, that's fine. So, yeah, first of all, well, thank you very much to all the speakers for sharing their knowledge and experience today. And I know that throughout this webinar, we have heard like different perspectives on climate smart education systems, like policy, early warning systems, engineering, school safety. And I want to highlight that although these topics may appear different, they all point toward the same objective, like ensuring that education systems continue functioning before, during, and after climate-related disasters. I would like to spend this 3-4 minutes bringing these different perspectives together and sharing how Save the Children contributes to this common objective through the SASI. Because I mean, we understand that this is not simply about constructing stronger buildings, but it's about helping ministries to strengthen the entire education system. So infrastructure planning, maintenance of school safety, and financing, of course, all work together. And I think this has also been mentioned by all the speakers today. I would also like to say that SASI is a global initiative, and although today's discussion has focused on the Caribbean, these challenges we have discussed are shared across many other parts of the world and are questions that every ministry asks and are remarkably similar. So how we reduce the risk, how do we improve school infrastructure, how do we assure educational continuity, how do we make better use of the limited resources. So I think one of the greatest strengths of SESI is that countries are able to learn from one another, and that experience generated in one region does not stay there. It just becomes part of a growing body of knowledge that can be support countries facing similar challenges. And I think this exchange of experience is in many ways one of the most valuable outcomes of the initiative. And also, well, I want to also remark that Save the Children has been contribute to connect like different actors. As within SASI, we support coordination, resilient infrastructure, school safety, educational continuity, and climate finance. And these work streams all reinforce one another because strong infrastructure requires good planning and reliable data, and also preparedness and coordination. And climate finance requires technical planning to transform priorities into investable projects. So again, I think that also we need to look at how we operate and manage the buildings once they're finished, and we need to stop the measuring success by the number of schools we complete or we retrofit, but I recognize that resilient is just a process; it's not a final product, and this happens all throughout the project cycle. So resilience begins the day the school is handed over, and we have been observing this same challenge in many countries. Yeah, so I will finish with one final reflection that resilient infrastructure again is not the final objective. Is ensuring that every child can continue learning safely despite this uncertain and increasingly extreme climate events that we're facing, and that buildings are part of a much larger education system, and they are continuously managed, maintained, and improved, and that we are really proud as Save the Children to contribute to that journey together with the ministries of education and all our partners across the Caribbean and around the world, and we are really look forward to continue this collaboration in the specific case of the Caribbean through the building's help desk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro. I think that brings us to the end of our session, but please do not feel locked out of asking any questions. So we have come to the end of the webinar. Thank you for attending. If you'd like to have any questions addressed to the panelists, please drop the questions here. Will we share presentations? We shall get back to you on that on email once we have the go-ahead from all the panelists. So when you're sharing the answers to the questions that you have, we will also be giving you an update on the presentations. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It was very good to be your host. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Regina.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you to all the
Thanks,
panelists.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.